Hello, fellow activators. Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Exercise Science is Fun. Today's topic is, why is physical activity good for us? Feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions, though I may not call on you because this is a recording. Today, we will be discussing the scientific evidence behind how active we were made to be based on research on our early human ancestors, the relationship between physical activity and chronic disease, and how much physical activity is recommended by the experts to keep us in good health. Let's begin with looking at what science has shown us from research on the physical activity of our early human ancestors. As you are all aware, we had a past as a species that involved a fair amount of labor to stay fed, hydrated, and sheltered. But with the rapid addition of technology such as cars, supply chains, and grocery stores, we are now much less physically active than our human ancestors were. But how much less active? Let's take a look at some interesting research from the anthropology literature. In this graph, we are looking at how much energy was expended by our early human ancestors over the last several million years. The blue diamonds represent the resting metabolic rate, or how much energy was needed by the body at rest. The green squares represent the total energy that was expended per day. So the difference between energy at rest and the total energy expended, which is indicated by the orange lines, represents how physically active our early ancestors were. So let's look at how active we are as a species today. Here we are on the bottom far right of the screen. As you can see, we are much less physically active. In fact, the results of the study suggest that we are 62% less active than our early ancestors. And according to the experts in the field of anthropology, this puts us in the fairly lame category. To put these research findings into a practical perspective, when researchers calculated how active we would need to be per day beyond our average physical activity now, they found that we would need to add a 12-mile hike into our daily routines to match our early human counterparts. So we are expending far less energy than our human ancestors. From the perspective of a healthy body weight, less physical activity would be alright if we didn't consume as much calories in our food as our early ancestors did. Let's take a look at a study that sheds some light on this topic. From this research study, we see that the caloric intake of our ancestors, as represented by the orange bar on the far left, was around 3,000 calories per day. As you can see from the bar on the far right, we take in only 400 calories less than our ancestors took in per day, which I guarantee is a fair amount less than one might burn on a 12-mile hike. In summary, we are not as active as we should be, especially for the amount of food we eat. So why does this matter? Well, let's start by taking a look at the interaction of our genes and our environment. Our DNA contains the genetic instructions needed for us to develop as recognizable human beings. However, our genes alone don't determine all of our human characteristics. Rather, when our genes interact with our environment, we have an outcome such as a human characteristic like body weight. It is important to understand, though, that the process of evolution, which is responsible for adapting our bodies to changing environments, is very, very slow. Therefore, we still have many of the same genetic blueprints that our ancestors did. So you could say that we are genetically designed to be very physically active. This is why when we are physically active, we tend to live healthier, disease-free lives in general. When we are not as active as we need to be, we tend to be at a higher risk for a whole host of chronic diseases such as overweight, obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and many other illnesses. Though physical inactivity can contribute to chronic disease, fortunately the converse is also true. When we become more physically active, we lower our risk for chronic disease. Here are some data how effective physical activity can be at lowering the risk of heart disease. In this graph, the green line shows that the more physically active one is, the lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. A similar relationship is shown when the researchers actually measured physical fitness by having participants exercise at a maximal level and then compared the least fit to the most fit. These findings are presented in the orange line. Notice the rapid decrease in the risk of heart disease when one moves from the least fit to just a little bit fit. This shows just how important even a little bit of exercise is and provides strong evidence that being physically active prevents heart disease. This next study shows a similar effect of exercise on diabetes risk. In this study, researchers looked at the effect of exercise over time on the ability of the body to healthfully regulate blood sugars. Compared to the inactive control group in orange, all of the exercise groups had better regulation of their blood sugars over time. Of the groups who participated in aerobic, resistance, or both aerobic and resistance exercise, the group who participated in both forms of exercise, represented by the blue line, had the greatest benefit. This study is just one study that shows that exercise plays an important role in preventing type 2 diabetes. In addition to cardiovascular disease and diabetes, research has also shown the importance of physical activity and the prevention of a host of other chronic illnesses, such as obesity and colon cancer, as well as improves the overall quality of life of a person and even improves the independent living in older adults. With all these benefits, it is no surprise that exercise doesn't just keep you feeling better while you are alive, but also helps one live a longer life. In this study, several thousand men and women were split up into 5 groups by the level of their physical fitness. As you can see, the least active group, Q1, on the far left, had a much higher risk of death than any of the other groups. In other words, being physically fit can ensure you live a longer life. So now that we've established that exercise is good for you, let's briefly talk about how much is recommended. According to the American Heart Association and the American College of Sports Medicine, it is recommended that all healthy adults need a minimum of 30 minutes of moderate physical activity 5 days per week, or a minimum of 20 minutes of vigorous physical activity 3 days per week. It is important to understand, though, that these are just minimum suggestions. There is what we call a dose-response relationship between the amount of physical activity and the benefits we gain from it. To understand what we mean by dose response, let's look back at the study on exercise and mortality. From this graph, you can see that in general, the higher the dose of exercise, the lower the risk for death. We also see a similar pattern in this study on heart disease and exercise. The more physically fit one is, the lower the risk for heart disease. So while these studies suggest that more exercise is better, it's also important to remember just how much of a benefit there is from becoming even a little bit more active. So there are 2 important conclusions from this presentation. Number 1, just a little bit of physical activity is associated with great health benefits. And number 2, count exercise up there with some of the other finer things in life, such as chocolate and wine. The more, the better. This concludes this week's edition of Exercise is Fun. Please tune in next week, same time, same channel.